Welcome, everyone. My name is Juniper. I'm the managing producer for Feldenkrais Access, and I'm here with Raz Ori, who's here with you to talk about his upcoming program, Improving the Freedom of Your Arms, which begins September 11th. Welcome, Raz.
Hi, Juniper. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live chat.
If you have a question for Roz from whatever platform you're joining us from, please write that in. And if you're, please let us know where you're joining from and something about yourself. We'd love to hear from you. And I'll get started with a couple of questions for Roz. Roz, this topic is new to Feldenkrais Access. Feldenkrais Access hasn't offered a class series on the arms before. What inspired you to teach this series, and what's your thinking behind it?
The human arms are very unique. Once we've came up from being four-legged animals, using our arms to support ourselves for locomotion, our arms became free to enable us a very rich repertoire of movements and a very rich repertoire of different use of our arms, including developing the dexterity in our hands, including throwing and being able to do a very, very rich, various types of activities with our arms. But since in a way, we don't use our arms as efficiently as we can, and prolonged sitting really affects how our whole body is organized and limits the repertoire of the use of our arms, we have a tendency to develop discomfort, pain, chronic tension in the arms, shoulders, neck, upper back. That can also affect the use of our hands, of course, but the whole structure and function of our shoulder girdles and upper limbs is unique on one hand, yet susceptible to many different issues once we're not using ourselves as efficiently as we should and we could. So this aspect of how unique the structure and the function is, and yet how we're not actually using our full potential in how we organize ourselves to be able to use our arms with the freedom, the efficiency, and the power and the strength for which they're designed and built. I find it just a fascinating topic, and even when we think about walking and balancing ourselves, walking upright, we see that we no longer use our arms to lean into the arms, yet the arms play a very dominant, very functional role in how we coordinate our walking and our balance. So the implications of not being well organized in our arms or having chronic tension in our shoulder, arms, upper back are from the implications of it is from walking to doing fine motor skills with our fingers to just the general comfort of ourselves and our body throughout our entire self.
Awesome. That's really inspiring. Thank you. For our listeners who may be familiar with other therapeutic modalities, for some of these implications that you were mentioning, Roz, limited mobility or pain, discomfort, chronic tension, what's different about the Feldenkrais method? Like, what is it that will be different about the experience of these classes that you're offering for people who may not be familiar with how the Feldenkrais method works?
Sure. So there are two very foundational principles in how we think about movement and work on improving our movement in the Feldenkrais method. One is that we think about the connectivity of the body part or of the particular movement to our entire self. So understanding that the freedom and the mobility of the arm is dependent on how I organize my shoulder girdle, and that how I organize my shoulder girdle is dependent on how I organize my entire spine and my pelvis all the way down to my hips. If we're talking about walking, it's also involving the movements of all the joints in the legs, including knees and ankles. So this holistic and full body approach is very unique to the Feldenkrais method. The other central principle is that we understand that in order to improve the connectivity and the harmony of our movements throughout our entire self, we need to actually decrease muscular efforts and strain. So there is a way to increase muscular effort to strengthen the muscles, but when we're looking for how to change a movement pattern that would include our entire self and that we would be able to organize our, in this case specifically our arms from and including our torso, we actually use movement patterns that require less effort to enable us to feel more fluidity in the movement, better organization, more harmony in the movement. And that is very, very unique because one of the problems when trying to actually do movements or movement exercises, once there is pain, chronic tension, and discomfort, is that the exercise can very easily exacerbate the thing that you're actually trying to improve or to diminish. And in the Feldenkrais approach, this uniqueness of actually reducing the effort and not pushing through the pain or the discomfort is very, very, again, unique and very, very efficient. And it takes a very different approach in how we actually think about the local issue that we're dealing with versus our general self-use.
Thank you. That's so comprehensive. I appreciate it. I wonder if, in relationship to that, you could speak a little bit about one of the conditions that I know people have a lot that bring them to the Feldenkrais method, which is frozen shoulder. And maybe some of our listeners out there have frozen shoulder and are considering this program. Could you speak a little bit further about how the Feldenkrais method works specifically in relationship to that condition?
Sure. So again, understanding the connectivity of the arm to the shoulder to the entire trunk, we actually use movement patterns in which we can control the degree of movement that we want to put on the shoulder. So if we do a certain movement pattern, we work through a certain movement pattern that can involve the movement of the arm, but also involves the movement of the trunk and the spine and the pelvis and the hips, we can then modulate how much mobility we're actually asking of ourselves in that moment from from the shoulder joint in this case. So someone with a frozen shoulder or very limited mobility and pain can actually find ways to modulate and to accommodate the movement exercise and how to use that movement pattern so that they don't hurt themselves, yet they introduce a little bit of mobility, the amount of mobility that is right for them in that specific moment, but that mobility is not isolated to the joint, but rather already connected to a full body pattern, which is really, really important to emphasize and to nourish when we're dealing with pain and discomfort and a frozen shoulder, of course. A lot of the movements that we're going to do, one can actually modulate how much you do on one side. Let's say one side is hurting and the other side is not. So you can work with the non-painful side to establish and crystallize the movement pattern that we're working on and understanding the relationships between the arm, the shoulder, and the trunk to then be able to transfer that movement pattern to the more problematic side, even if you're doing it on a much smaller range or almost like on a micro level, but you're already preparing your brain and your body to be able to cope better with greater ranges of motion.
That's awesome. And I think that what you're saying relates to more things than frozen shoulder. Um, I have a chronic pain condition called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, and it's similar to fibromyalgia or some other chronic pain conditions as well. And I really loved your course on chronic pain because it used so much of the imagination. Will you be implementing some of those things in this course for people like me who may be nervous about doing something that engages the part of their body where they have chronic pain?
Yes, absolutely. One of the empowering tools that we use in the Feldenkrais method is the use of imagination, in which we can actually train our sensation, we can train our brain, and we know that when you imagine a movement, you are actually activating all the areas in the brain that control movement. And even if you're limited in the range or you're limited because of pain, through the use of imagination, you can really give yourself the sensation that you are performing a movement that is impossible for you to perform. And that's a very, very, very empowering experience that actually also helps the injured area to heal in a way, because we know that when we have an injury, it's not just a bottom-top mechanism that we have an injury in the body that signals the brain, oh, there's a problem. We know that it's a bidirectional communication, that the brain can also send signals down into the injured area, including neurochemicals and hormones that are related to healing of the tissue in a negative way or in a positive way. And when you actually imagine yourself using a particular joint that you cannot use so well, but you imagine that you're using it better than you can actually use it in reality, that can actually have a healing effect directly on the tissue in that joint. So yes, we will find different strategies and different tricks to how to improve the sensation, imagination, the creating the pattern, the image of the pattern of the movement without further injuring ourselves, by taking care of ourselves and creating conditions that we feel safe working with our injury or pain or discomfort without exacerbating it.
That's great. Thank you, Roz. I really appreciate the words of encouragement, and I look forward to it. I'm excited about the lessons. We have a question from someone who is doing strength training and wants to know if this series of lessons will help them engage in that kind of activity. So maybe like a little bit on a different spectrum, somebody who's like really active and wants to know if they can use this class series to help them in the gym more.
Sure. So even when you're working in the gym, a very central component of healthy strength training that will prevent injury and excessive muscular, because you can really easily hurt yourself when doing fitness training and working with weights. And partially it has to do with how easy it is to lose the sensation of connection of the arms to our center. And when we hold a weight in our arms, the sensation comes mostly from the muscles of the arms that are dealing with pushing or pulling the weight, when actually our body and our trunk and our back and our pelvis are the foundation from which the arms work, from which the arms are able to execute force. Um, so all of the lessons that we're going to explore are going to really emphasize and elucidate how the arm in many ways is an extension of our trunk. It's an extension of our spine. And if we think about the movement of the arms as originating from the shoulder, we actually create a disconnection in our body image that affects how we use ourselves between the arm and the trunk. And that could easily lead to excessive muscular efforts around the shoulder joint, excessive shearing forces and compression around the shoulder joint, and eventually injury. So yes, our arms are free. They're free to move in relationship to the trunk, yet they are connected, and the trunk is the foundation and the basis for the freedom of the arms. And the same is true with strength. We have strength in our arms, But without the well-coordinated use of the arm with the trunk, with the pelvis, with our hips, that strength in the arm can be actually counterproductive and damaging when used in a non-efficient way, of course.
In relationship to that, in relationship to the interdependence between the harmonious movement of the arms and the harmonious organization of the trunk and the spine, is there something that you can speak to for anyone who's listening who may be experiencing back pain or spine injury or something that's more proximal related, that they're coming to this series of lessons for something along those lines?
Absolutely. So one of the strategies that we use is because our arms have this interdependency from the trunk and have a lot of degrees of motion and freedom of motion, we can use the movement of the arms as an access point to feel what is happening within our trunk. So it's a bidirectional dialogue. We can work on the trunk to improve the movement of the arms, but we can also use the movement of the arms to get access to what is happening in our chest, what is happening in our spine. And because these movement patterns that we're going to work with are always bidirectional and will always investigate and explore the relationship between the spine and the limbs, between the arms and the trunk, the movement patterns themselves are actually very, very beneficial for better organizing the spine, for finding better alignment in the spine, for finding better flexibility in the chest and the rib cage and in the spine. So yes, the lessons themselves will be actually very beneficial. Also, if you do not have a specific arm shoulder issue, but rather something that is more proximal, even your hips.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Raz. I know that there are listeners out there who have probably taken your series on intelligent walking and received a lot of benefit from it. So hopefully they will hear that message and join us for the class series that you're teaching now. We have a question. I'm just going to read it. I am a violinist and rely on the mobility of my hands and arms. I've noticed more discomfort and mobility issues as I get older. I want to improve the comfort of my arms and also my playing. Will this class series help with that?
Absolutely. So what happens to everyone, and of course to musicians in a more particular way, and even more so for musicians who play a non-symmetrical instrument, such as the violin, that it's always biased towards one direction and the arms are always in a different configuration, one from the other, is that we habituate ourselves and we get fixated in a certain configuration. So if you sit at your desk in front of your computer 8 hours a day, you become fixated and habituated in a certain position. If you play your violin for a substantial amount of time, you become fixated and habituated in a certain muscular skeletal configuration that, of course, over prolonged periods of time can be damaging. So the movements that we're going to use are very organic movement patterns that we're going to, of course, work on them in a symmetrical way, thus giving the brain the opportunity to, in a way, break out or dissolve some of those fixated, habituated configurations to, in a way, bring the body back to like manufacturer's settings. What are the relationships between the arms and the shoulders and the trunk in their potential state? If we haven't had all of these years of damaging ourselves by having a limited movement repertoire or continuously being fixated and habituated to certain configurations. So yes, for office workers and musicians and violinists alike, these explorations will bring back a more harmonious relationships between the arms and the trunk that then would enable you to go back to your habitual activity in a smarter way, maybe not becoming so fixated in your habitual configurations, but having a slightly wider repertoire and being able to notice when do you effort in a non-necessary way when you do the activity that you usually do, so that you become less rigidified or less restricted by those habitual patterns.
Roz, I wonder if you can even further expand your answer to that question to speak to people who are involved in athletic sports like tennis players or basketball players who may be looking to find better organization in their particular sport.
Yeah, so anybody who does any kind of these activities knows that the efficiency and the joy in those activities is so dependent on what is called good technique. But good technique is exactly that. It has to do with how well you organize the limbs and the trunk, how well you coordinate the different timings of all the different parts that need to move to be able to perform that action, whether it's shooting a hoop, playing tennis, playing golf. It's all about the intricacies of the different elements in the movement that fit together to create an efficient movement. And we're all, in a way, limited by how much we can improve. Most of us, we get better at what we do to a certain point, and from there, improving is not that easy. And part of why improving becomes not so easy is because, again, we habituate ourselves to certain patterns. We find something that works good enough and we fixate on it. But in that good enough, there might be a lot of disorganization. So what we're going to try to do is to try to, in a way, revive the brain's ability to sort out all the different little movements that happen, all the different elements that happen within an action, to be able to fit those elements together in the best, most possible, efficient way. And then going back to your sport activity would enable you to actually find little things that you can improve that before you weren't sensing or you were oblivious of, or certain efforts were masking your ability to sense that, oh, I can do this a little bit differently. Oh, I always clench here or contract here. Maybe I don't need to do that. Oh, I can find more smoothness in a particular movement, whereas before I was muscling through that movement. So this idea of finding more fluidity in the movement during the lessons and then being able to generalize the sensation of fluidity, being able to generalize the sensation of, oh, there is even a better way to find comfort in my movement and efficiency in my movement, is something that you would then be able to take with you anywhere you want.
That makes me think too, Roz, of dancers and how dancers have often been drawn to the Feldenkrais method to improve their ease of movement. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, sometimes, well, first of all, dancers work very, very hard. The physical demand on a dancer is sometimes very, very high, and thus they are prone to injury. Depending on the dancing style, form, modality, of course, but many times dancer actually feel in their body sort of separated, that they're moving from different parts, not in an integrated way, which again makes them more susceptible to injury. So again, finding the connectivity, the fluidity, how all the parts are connected and move in a harmonious way. Sometimes for dancers, what it takes is to actually explore, and not just dancers, for everyone, to actually explore those qualities in a situation that is much more simpler than the actual demand of dancing. So doing a simple movement pattern, a very organic movement pattern, lying on the floor or in sitting, to be able to find more connectivity and flow, and then being able to, again, generalize and apply those qualities back in the dancing field or, yeah, the dancing situation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roz. We had a question from someone who's tried the 5-minute lesson that was posted on social media and also went out to our email list. I wonder, or no, sorry, they ask, they were impressed with the change that they noticed in their arm flexibility. Can you explain a little bit about how this worked?
So in the 5-minute lesson, if I recall correctly, we tried first to feel the lightness or heaviness or the quality of lifting our arm upwards. And then instead of working the shoulder and just working repetitively on lifting the arm back, what we did is actually turning the trunk so that this arm that was coming up would go backwards, if I recall correctly. So, so again, we know that for the arm to come up easily, a lot of activity is actually in the back. Not the arm, not the shoulder, it's in the back. Because the biggest muscle of the back is a muscle that connects to the arm. And the more superficial that are like sheet-like structures of muscles in the back are muscles that control the shoulder blade, which is what makes your arm lift easily or not. So by turning backwards and taking the elbow back, we were actually communicating with these backwards parts of ourselves that are the dominating factor in the ease of lifting the arm without almost like by tricking ourselves, because when you take the elbow back and you just turn a little bit, you're not even feeling that you're doing anything associated to the arm or to the shoulder or to lifting the arm forward. So in a way, it's like, oh, I'm not doing anything with the arm, but actually you are, because you're working on those foundations in the back and those muscles in the back that control the movements of the shoulder blade that are so necessary for lifting the arm forward and up. So there's like this we're tricking the system by understanding the arms to the trunk relationships, and by understanding that if you work too hard on the specific problem that you want to improve, you might be finding yourself in a trap. And that for improving the thing that you want to improve, sometimes you need to go to an adjacent part or do something that has to do with the problem that you have, but is not so specific. So the brain doesn't feel threatened or pressured that, oh, we got to solve this specific problem. So these are partial answers. Of course, it was, yes, an interesting process, and there's more to say or to explain about the mechanism of how it works, but on a simplistic level, I think these are, yeah, crucial points.
And I think that the best way to find out how it works is to come to the first class, which is on September 11th. The first class is free, and if you register before September 15th, it's $25 off the usual rate. So please take advantage of that, and please join us on September 11th. Thank you so much, Roz. It was a pleasure to talk to you about your upcoming series.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you all for coming to the live chat. And yes, I'm looking forward to seeing you September 11th.